All time for some fancy football today, and we begin with the news that we've been monitoring all morning long. Breaking earlier today, that's with the Browns and them announcing that their QB Deshaun Watson is out for the season. Watson needs season-ending surgery on a broken bone in his throwing shoulder. An MRI also revealed a high left ankle sprain. He sustained both injuries in that comeback win over the Ravens on Sunday. This leaves P.J. Walker as the starting QB in Cleveland. You would think that starts this Sunday against the Steelers for the Browns moving forward. So when it comes to a fantasy perspective, these are the most added players of late in all of the CBS Sports fantasy leagues out there right now. You figure that things might be changing soon with the Deshaun Watson news coming down, but Ty Chandler, as it stands right now, the most added player out there, followed by the Commanders defense and Noah Brown there, that Texans wideout. Now let's dive into this even further. For that, we have Dave Richard here on set, and Heath Cummings also tapping in with us. And Dave, let's get straight to it and look at the situation for Cleveland. A tough one. Their QB1 going down. When you look at the Browns, who are there in the thick of it for the wild card spot and in the division, how does this impact them?
This is not good because we've already seen 3 games this year where P.J. Walker is the starting quarterback for the Cleveland Browns, or he plays a lot for the Browns. There was one game where he had to take over for Watson, and the numbers weren't great. They were okay for Jerome Ford. They were okay for Amari Cooper. They were pretty good for David Njoku. So I think Njoku rest of season still qualifies as a top 12 fantasy tight end. I think this is a big hit to Amari Cooper. I think this is a smaller hit to Jerome Ford. These are guys that if you can trade them for anything right now that resembles their value with Deshaun Watson, I would do it. But I look at Amari Cooper specifically as a wide receiver who might be around 15 PPR points per game. No one drafted him for that kind of production, but that's what we should expect with P.J. Walker as his QB.
Yeah, this is a downgrade. I'm not sure it's an enormous downgrade. Deshaun Watson hasn't played like Deshaun Watson for most of this season. So you're going from a middling quarterback to probably a bad quarterback. But the only guy whose value I'm really negatively impacting is Amari Cooper's. He was a boom-bust number 2 wide receiver, in my opinion. Now he's a boom-bust number 3 wide receiver. Still probably a start most weeks, except for in the most difficult of matchups. Dave said it. The target volume for David Njoku probably going to be more consistent, maybe even better production for him. He's a top 12 tight end rest of season, and I still view Jerome Ford as a number 2 running back who probably needs either a big workload in the passing game or a touchdown each week for you to feel good about him.
I should also add that Kareem Hunt is still in play as a touchdown or bust running back. His role really doesn't change, but he's the one that works at the goal line for Cleveland, not Jerome Ford.
Certainly there's some fantasy managers probably out there scrambling right now who, unfortunately, I guess if you had Deshaun Watson as your top QB out there, you were probably looking a little bit sick already. Yeah. I had Watson on my roster, but thankfully I also had Sam Howell and Joe Burrow, so I'm fine. But Heath, for those people out there who need to now find a QB, where should they look?
Well, Jordan Love was the most added quarterback of the week. He's the only quarterback who's available still in more than 35% of leagues who also projects in my top 20 this week. It's been an up and down season for Love. The touchdowns have been good. Everything else has been pretty bad. But he has a fantastic matchup against the Chargers. Basically, every game the Chargers play in is a shootout, or at least has the potential to be a shootout. There's only 3 quarterbacks who have not scored 22 fantasy points against the Chargers this season. They're all backups. So I do like Love's chances of getting to that 20-point range against the Chargers this week. You're probably going to spend most of the rest of the season, if you just lost Deshaun Watson and didn't have any other options, in a streaming position. Love's the guy to stream this week.
We just learned that there's a change in quarterback in Cleveland after all, and it's not going to be P.J. Walker. It's going to be Dorian Thompson-Robinson.
Yeah.
A lot of syllables in
DTR.
They're a rookie. Let's just call him DTR. Yeah. And I think that changes the math even more for Cleveland. I think that makes it worse on the pass catchers there. So maybe, like Heath talked about, a wide receiver 3, that's a big downgrade for Amari Cooper. Maybe he's now a low-end wide receiver 3 until Thompson-Robinson can actually understand what he's looking at. And the Steelers as his first matchup, that is going to be rough. And David Njoku kind of a safety valve for them. I do want to talk about a former Packers quarterback who should have some good fantasy value. Do you remember the name Aaron Rodgers? I think Rodgers has a chance to come back, and now is the start of the time when you would consider adding him to your bench. Now, if you've got IR spots and Aaron Rodgers is a free agent in your league, go ahead and stash him. Get started now. If he comes back in Week 15, he'll play against Miami. I think he'll be okay there. The week after that, he gets the Commanders. It's one of the best matchups you could ask for, and it's in the fantasy playoffs. So start thinking about what are your matchups going to look like at quarterback toward the end of the year. If you're headed toward the playoffs and you have the spot to give, go put Aaron Rodgers on your bench.
Yeah, the QB landscape ever changing. That breaking news that we just said right there with DTR being the starter out there for Cleveland. You look at running backs, though, for you, Dave, and where are things trending?
Well, let's talk about a running back that I think can come up big in the future, and I think that's Rico Dowdle. And we sat here last week, and I told you guys, Ty Chandler was going to be the one who could step up and be a quarterback down the line who could matter, and now Heath will tell you all about Ty Chandler. But I'm going to tell you about Rico Dowdle because we've seen him over the course of the season, Zach. He's had better yards per carry than Tony Pollard. He's had a better avoided tackle rate than Tony Pollard. He even has a better, this is going to sound bad, he has a better success rate inside the 5-yard line converting touchdowns than Tony Pollard. And I wonder if it's just a matter of time before Rico Dowdle starts splitting significantly with Tony Pollard. Pollard hasn't gotten the job done. So Rico Dowdle, the next running back in line for me that I'd like to stash. If I missed on Keaton Mitchell, if I missed on Ty Chandler, Rico Dowdle, the one I want on my bench.
Yeah, Ty Chandler, definitely the most popular running back to add this week, and for good reason. He'd already moved into that timeshare position with Alexander Mattison after the injury to Cam Akers. Then Mattison suffered a concussion, and the timing couldn't be much better for Ty Chandler because Mattison's been inefficient most of the year. He's struggled with fumbles. Chandler likely to get his first start against the Denver Broncos defense that has been terrible against running backs almost all season long. That Broncos defense has been better at certain things recently. But we saw James Cook, like every time he touched the ball, it seemed like he was either dropping it or going for 10+ yards against the Broncos in their most recent game. So I think this could be a situation where Chandler, who's really more of a flex option this week, could do what we saw Devin Singletary do and take advantage of the absence of the starter and maybe become the starter himself.
Heath, let's look at the wide receiver position. For that, how are you looking right now?
Well, Noah Brown is the top ad. He has had a remarkable couple of games, over 100 yards in each of his last 2 games. It seems like every catch that he catches, it's a 20-yard gain at least. So if Nico Collins remains out this week, and we still don't know for sure, I would view Noah Brown as a number 2 wide receiver in fantasy in this week. If Nico Collins returns, I still think you want to have Brown on your roster. And in a 3-wide receiver league, especially a 3-wide receiver league where you start a flex, you're likely still starting him. We've kind of seen this Texans wide receiver core be hard to predict. We get the Nico Collins week, the Tank Dell week, the Noah Brown week. What I'm expecting when Nico comes back is that Robert Woods kind of goes away, and all 3 of these Texans wide receivers are usable on a weekly basis.
My favorite thing about Noah Brown is that he seems to be the guy that gets open when C.J. Stroud is under pressure. He's scrambling around. He gets those opportunities. I think there is some staying power for him, maybe not to be 20+ PPR points, but maybe around 12 to 13 PPR points. I think Heath made a great call. So who's the next Noah Brown? Who's the next guy that could break out at wide receiver? The first name that I'm kind of going to just glance over is Brandon Cooks because he's already been rostered in a bunch of leagues. But let's go a little bit deeper, Zach. Let's go with Jaden Reed of the Green Bay Packers. He's given us at least 11 PPR points in 3 of his past 4 games. And I know he doesn't have a stud throwing to him at quarterback. Jordan Love, certainly for fantasy, he's shown us something earlier this year, last week, a good fantasy game, but he hasn't been exactly the most accurate thrower. But Jaden Reed's a guy that he's been in decent rhythm with, and I would imagine that Jaden Reed will continue to be a focal point of this Green Bay offense. Christian Watson just hasn't clicked. Romeo Doubs knows for the end zone, but hasn't gotten a lot of volume. This is a receiver that is worth stashing on the bench. He could eventually become what Noah Brown has become, and that's a wide receiver 3.
Yeah, the offense in Green Bay, certainly something to be desired at times for them. A lot to be desired, I feel like, from times all season long from the tight ends if you don't have one of the top guys, Heath. But right now, where are things trending for you?
Yeah, I mean, we've had pretty good luck with Trey McBride, Dalton Kincaid off the waiver wire. Those guys are all gone now. We're looking for desperation streamers if you need a streaming tight end in Week 11. Luke Musgrave's the guy I'm going with. 51 and 64 yards in his last 2 games. He's a rookie with a little bit of upside. We often see rookie pass catchers get better in the second half of the season. And as I said earlier about Jordan Love, like if you're going to pick a streaming tight end, you might as well pick the guy playing against the Chargers because there might be 60 points scored in that game. Hopefully he scores 6 of them.
I'm pretty sure it was Heath 2 weeks ago telling everybody to get Trey McBride. So when Heath talks about tight ends, I absolutely listen. Luke Musgrave, definitely somebody to go get. But what about Tyler Conklin evolving as a, you kind of laughed at that because you kind of look at him and you kind of laugh a little bit and you think about, well, he's never really been a big time fantasy tight end. So I get where you're coming from. And then you think about his quarterback and that's absolutely laugh worthy. You're not laughing at this. 12 or more PPR points each of his past 2 games. The Jets have figured out that they can't throw every pass to Garrett Wilson. Conklin could step up and be that number 2 option. And we've already talked about Aaron Rodgers eventually coming back. When Rodgers does come back, it seems like a lifetime away, but when he will come back, Conklin could be even better. So this is a tight end that is stream worthy. I think Musgrave, rest of season, there's a lot of great appeal there. Conklin, somebody I might rather have this week just because I think he's got a chance to have a little more fantasy points than Luke Musgrave.
Yeah, I'm still kind of just taking to heart the fact that you said about Aaron Rodgers and maybe picking him up for your team right now and stashing him.
If you have Deshaun Watson, you've got the spot
Listen,
open.
I might get to my phone right after this and look at that right now immediately. Heath Cummings and Dave Richard, thank you so much for hopping on the show with us, talking some fantasy football. And if you want even more fantasy football talk and you are in a dynasty league and you think, oh, no one ever talks about us and what we should do, listen, we've got you covered with that. Make sure you listen, make sure you like, subscribe, give the guys a follow because they will help you every step of the way. We've got you here on HQ.